Hello, I'm Chethan Rao, and thank you for the invitation to present the Curing Coma campaign at this excellent conference. Some of my disclosures. The objectives for today for this this talk will be to discuss the concept of Curing Coma campaign. What is the construct of Curing Coma campaign? What are the educational, research, outreach, and engagement efforts of Curing Coma? And to kind of elaborate the importance of global collaboration efforts and how to address curing coma and disorders of consciousness. So what is Curing Coma campaign? Curing Coma campaign is the first ever global initiative to tackle the unifying concept of coma as a treatable medical entity, and this is happening under the auspices of Neurocritical Care Society. The goals of the Curing Coma campaign is to focus the science of acute disorders of consciousness on identifying and testing therapeutic intervention, and to form a community of providers, such as who are gathered here, scientists and advocates to test and implement these advances towards improving the outcomes of our patients. But Curing Coma in its organization has transformed itself into a well-functioning but broadly supported structure, in the center of which stays mission control, and there are different working groups and different modules. Modules are the operational aspects of things, while working groups have specific tasks associated with them. There is, for example, there are multiple modules involving supporting the working groups, and members of each group have a good crosstalk between the two bigger entities we see here. I lead the member sites module along with Brianna Witherspoon from UT Southwestern, and our goal is to pretty much encourage the development of large collaborators and to expand the presence of Curing Coma campaign across different specialties, the reason for which we are here. And the operations of these committees are overseen by an advisory council and also a steering committee. So what have we done with Curing Coma campaign, and then how did it come into existence? Well, the Curing Coma campaign came into existence after a little bit of soul searching from the neurocritical care providers. It was in 2018 in Boca Raton that there was a Blue Ocean strategy meeting at the national annual conference. So the question we asked ourselves was, what is an area which is unexplored, which can be efficient in creating an initiative that is larger than the society itself and that encompasses multiple areas of expertise, and then helps in unifying all the providers to create good patient outcomes. We kind of took an approach similar to what industries take. Blue Ocean strategy is usually developed for industries, and where companies look for new venues of uncompeting markets. In other words, Blue Oceans means there's plenty of fish, there's no competition, the resources are yours. On the other hand, red oceans are pretty much where you don't have any resources. That's because of too much of competition. In defining that, Dr. Jeff Ling in the conference challenged us to wake the dead. How will you wake the dead? Or how will you reverse the most important outcome of that our patient and our family needs? And that is curing coma. And that's when Curing Coma took its origin. And since then, it's developed into this bigger structure. And following that big structure, we have had significant achievements and developments, which I will try to detail in the next few minutes. So the first ever meeting of Curing Coma campaign was in 2019 in Vancouver, where the first scientific advisory council met and had the recommendations and observations. The first observation was there are critical time-sensitive issues to be handled. One is, how do you define a coma patient? There is no uniform definition of coma that everybody agrees upon. The definition of coma that I explain is completely different than what my colleague would. So in other words, comatose patients have a specific endotype. Endotype is the manifestation of a patient's outcome related to any underlying injury, and with supporting workup from either a clinical, biological, or imaging techniques. Then they were able to identify 4 different types of endotypes of coma. One endotype without structural damage, things like status epilepticus and drug overdoses. Endotypes with structural or functional damage, that is amenable to replacement or bypass therapy. And this is the endotype that we are interested in, because our prediction models for these patients are poor. And we want to make sure that we provide the most support in improving outcomes for these patients. And then there is a subset of patients who do not improve despite supportive care. And then finally, there are mimics, things like locked-in syndrome or severe aphasia or abulia can present like disorders of consciousness. And we have to identify and then separate them so that we address the ones that we can actually help in doing better. Furthermore, there's questions about biomarkers. Biomarkers are important in evaluating patients' outcome. However, our understanding of biomarkers is not very clear. There are different kinds of biomarkers. There are for biomarkers for brains at rest, structural static imaging of like MRIs and CTs, things that look like neuronal activities, routine EEGs, functional connectivity measures on an MRI, or other brain physiological measures. And then obviously there's some biochemical markers of cerebral injury, which can be obtained from serum and CSF. There are markers for passive perturbations, somatosensory evoked potentials, event-related potentials, TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation related potentials, and then there is functional EEGs. And obviously, active perturbation is when the patient actually interacts with you for assessments, which includes behavioral, as well as task-based or functional EEG or fMRIs. And then finally, this will not be useful unless we have a proof of concept clinical trial developing to show the utility of these agents in predicting or defining endotypes. However, we don't have an endotype. There is no clinical trial so far that shows therapeutic response when patients are treated in early phase. There is improper measures to look at what we are assessing. And then all we have done is look at indirect biomarkers to see these patients. So all in all, definitely we need new mechanistic approach to understand disorders of consciousness. And then that led to the first virtual symposium sponsored by NIH for coma and disorders of consciousness. And in this particular conference, there were 6 specific questions that were discussed. How do we define endotypes of phenotypes? What biomarkers are important? How do we develop proof of concept clinical trials? How do we hone our neuroprognostication? How do we predict, assist, and enhance long-term recovery? And then finally, how do we handle all this data that comes to us? How do we create large data sets? And then there are plenty of manuscripts that come out of this particular conference. And then I will highlight some of the gap analysis that was done as a result of this. Ideally, the things that we found was that there is obviously lack of pre-injury, clinical, imaging, physiological markers. We need a better understanding of mechanism and time course of recovery. We need to have widely implemented common data elements. Everybody should speak the same language. And obviously, all the outcomes should be patient-centered. And then the knowledge base is very limited. So withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment, when we do so, we are heavily biased with our previous experiences. And obviously, the integrated healthcare delivery is not currently existent, and then we need rigorous scientific support to do that. So And following that, just to give a couple of examples, there are a few endotypes depending on their trajectories of outcome. They may switch paths across their over a period of time. However, we would have to create an appropriate healthcare system or healthcare delivery model in an effort to capture the long-term recovery of these patients, so that our prognostication models are appropriate and that we provide adequate support and care for such patients. And how do we do that? By understanding what variables predict outcome, by looking at what kind of intermediate outcomes are important at specific points for different endotypes, and then how do we describe the recovery trajectories when there is no limitations of care, and then importantly, how can we harness all these big data and help make use of those big data to help us prognosticate better? And how do we communicate to the families of the patients that we are uncertain about certain key elements and processes? And then identify better healthcare models for appropriate delivery of care. And then finally, advocate for such healthcare delivery process. As you see, there is a lot of effort gone into developing all this process. And then following that, there are multiple publications that came out, and other speakers will be talking more about the biology and also the diagnostics of coma. Then I will spend a little bit about talking about endotypes. Endotypes in this fantastic manuscript, which is, by the way, freely available for all the readers through Neurocritical Care Society and Neurocritical Care Elsevier publications, can be divided as considered as a three-dimensional model. The first x-axis delineates the clinical phenotypes of the patient, which is complemented by the y-axis, which includes static neuroimaging like CT and MRIs. And then you add a third component with the brain function. And this brain function could be related to either an EEG or a functional imaging study like an MRI or a PET. And that comes with a 3D model. However, you can overlay that on a newer scale that's been developed called the AVCM, or the Arousal, Volitional, Motor Control, and Cognitive Model. And once you have this construct, and depending on the mobility within this particular construct over a period of time, you'll have variable consciousness endotypes within the same patient. How does that translate? For example, this is a score looking at arousal, volitional output, cognitive content, and mechanistic bias. And this score attempts to also identify minimally consciousness disorders, which the other speakers will be spending a good amount of time discussing. One interesting finding is once you apply this particular scale onto the 3D model, what you come up with is a very complex level of interplay at the cellular, neuronal, or a macrocellular or structure, or at the system level. In other words, you can be able, eventually our hope is to be able to characterize a patient with three coordinates of x1 to xn, y1 to yn, and z1 to zn, and then track their progress across a period of time and identify specific markers that would have triggered it. Obviously, this includes a lot of unknown variables, and also we need to make sure that we have a lot of support to these such trials. And finally, that kind of led to the next involvement of curing coma in a second conference from NIH, where the questions that were addressed were defining the coma and disorders of consciousness. What are the research priorities for biology, for coma database, for prognostication, for patient care in coma? Or what are the early clinical trials we should plan? What are the priorities for long-term recovery? And then what are the ethical considerations of patients in coma? Or what is our prognostic humility? And those the data from this conferences are still under writing, and then they will be eventually published. And then I will ask the attendees in the conference to look forward to their publication. One additional thing that we did launch from the study is a come-together study that Dr. Hellbach is going to present. And this particular study looked at, what is the most commonly used definition of coma? What are the diagnostic tools available? What's the variability in care? What are the common causes seen across the globe? And then what are the attitudes towards prognosis in such patients? And the other question we also asked was, what is the incidence and point prevalence of coma across the population? We don't have an answer till now, and we just have an answer now. We surveyed about 100 US and 1,000 US and 1,000 UK quote unquote lay population through a prolific database, and which provided us some interesting information, which will be presented soon and published soon as well. And the other thing the Curing Coma campaign did was to create a World Coma Day. The World Coma Day is an international effort to bring in all participants of Curing Coma campaign under one single emblem, and that emblem is appropriate patient care. And to create awareness of coma and to be able to dissipate information regarding disorders of consciousness and to create awareness of coma was the principal purpose of this Curing Coma Day. And that happened on the 22nd of March, 2021. 1,200 participants from 41 countries participated across the globe. And this was a 24/7 run conference which was managed by moderators across the globe. And then just to give you an example, some of the educational talks included were coma science for non-scientists, how can we stimulate awakening from coma, how about family education for patients with coma, what is the biology, global perspectives, and some patient experiences as well. All this is stored under the curingcoma.org website, and then if you go under World Coma Day, all these talks are available. I would encourage everyone to go visit that to to explore and to understand all these fantastic talks. More importantly, we are not just done with education. Our engagement module has come up with this an outstanding Curing Coma webinar about prognostic humility and then ethical dilemmas. So this is an active dialogue that's being recorded, and then it's available on YouTube. I would also encourage our participants of this conference to go visit that. Interesting concepts about what are the ethical dilemmas of a Curing Coma population, and then what is post-acute care, and then how it is to be considered more a right than a financial liability in improving outcomes for these patients. And this is a fantastic discussion. And then what else is coming up? Curing Coma is very active. There are more than 200 people, placing their blood, sweat, and tears into this effort. And we are developing a prospective pilot study, creation of coma database. There are some common data elements that are under development, and there are educational materials coming in for the patient families, for students and allied health providers. And outreach, which is part I am involved in. We are organizing all the collaborators across the globe into the regional components, and then trying to understand their research capabilities and to provide and encourage them to participate in Curing Coma campaign. And more exciting material are coming through. And what I would request of you is to go to Curing Coma campaign, click on Get Involved. And then if you're not registered yet, please register yourself. We are also active on Twitter and Facebook. And you can, if you're having trouble reaching them, you can write to me on my email at listed below, or directly to the Curing Coma at neurocriticalcare.org. Curing coma cannot happen by very few selected individuals. To cure coma, we need an entire workforce that comprises of people across specialties, across continents, to help our patients get better. And then this is my earnest request for you to get involved in the campaign if you're not. So I wish you a very happy, different kind of coma, a happy food coma to you and your family in the upcoming Thanksgiving. And then I look forward to answering questions at the end of the session. Thank you, and you have a nice day.